Okay, welcome everyone. Selamat datang buat teman-teman yang mungkin lagi joining. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome back to AECC Uni Station. And this time we are honored to be able to collaborate with one of the university in Queensland, Queensland University of Technology. Dan sesuai judul ya, jadi kita akan handling Python. So it's a coding one-on-one workshop where you will be able to learn about the basic of Python from the alumni of QUT itself. So yeah, hari ini we are honored. So I will introduce our panelists today. Ada Miss Justina Saksono. She's an in-country engagement manager for Indonesia from QUT International. Hi, Yus. How are you? From Surabaya, yeah. You're based in Surabaya at the moment. Yeah. Okay. And we also have Jason K. Rumengan. So he's the QUT alumni, now an associate cybersecurity and digital trust at PwC in Australia. So you're in Brisbane, yeah, Jason. How are you?
Right. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Ya, so hari ini mungkin sedikit agenda ya. Mungkin setelah ini kita akan dengar langsung dari Miss Justina mengenai QUT Brisbane study in QUT. So you have idea about studying QUT. And then I think he will also share about his experience in finding job in after graduates, especially working onshore setelah finishing your study at Queensland. And then we just go on into the the workshop. Nanti di akhir acara kita akan menjawab Q&A. Jadi in the bottom of your mungkin it depends whether you do it from your phone or your laptop. Where actually there's a Q&A button, so you can type up your questions. Please type your question there instead in the chat box, karena we were afraid that we oversight your question. So we will be answering your questions later on once we complete the workshop. So I believe this will be quite interactive. So please be active in participating Jason's workshop today. Okay, so without further ado, I think I will hand over to Justina.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yonela. And good afternoon everyone. Mungkin kali ini saya akan lebih banyak berbicara bahasa Indonesia supaya bisa cepat juga kali ya ngomongnya. Jadi izinkan saya share dulu untuk screen saya. Perkenalkan kembali, nama saya Justina. Jadi saya based di Indonesia. Jadi kalau teman-teman atau mungkin orang tuanya pengen ngomong lagi nanti setelah sesi ini, kita bisa bikin one-on-one session juga, appointment dengan AECC. Nah, perhaps so I would like to begin with asking a question for you all. So it's okay if you don't have the answer, and I just want you to think about it. And the question is about how do you want to represent your generation in the real world? You are all the change makers, not just for the future, but also for now. And the voice of your generation will shape the world. So what do you really care about? What motivates you? And what do you want to change about our world? And so today, what I want to share with you is QUT is committed in helping you to make change that matters, to help you make your own impact. Wait, sorry.
The real world starts here, loud and clear. One decision launches your mission to become valuable, adaptable, unstoppable. In the real world, hands-on ability shapes your credibility to flex your flexibility and thrive where others dive. In the real world, top of their list, you got this. Connect to the best, outthink the rest. Summon your own success in the real world. Feed your fire for innovation, inspiration.
Sorry.
The yearning, burning aspiration to represent your generation in the real world. Be the one, the young gun, the up and come, the standout, she, he, they, or we that shakes the tree in the real world.
So sorry for the. Oh my goodness. Okay. Some technical issues here. Well, anyway, after this, I'm also gonna play another video. And I want you all to, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry for this. Can you see the slide on your screen, Yunila?
Okay. Yes, I can see
Cool.
why QUT.
Okay. Cool. So I actually kept this 5 points blank. So I will actually want you all to think about what makes QUT different from other universities. So it may be about our location, it may be about our ranking, our reputation. It can be from what Jason kind of tell you about this after this. So what do you think about the difference between QUT and other universities? And if you want to make a guess, I have actually some presents for you also. You can keep this link or scan the barcode, and I will give some presents for the answers that you answer. So just listen carefully from the video or from the workshop that Jason will deliver after this.
QUT has a history of extraordinary achievement
and a future of great promise.
With 2 major campuses in the heart of Brisbane
and advanced online learning options,
Queensland University of Technology is one of Australia's most visionary and purpose-driven universities.
we're the university for the real world, fast-tracking real change
and fueling the career ambitions of students and researchers
from all over the world through practical collaborations with industry and work-integrated learning.
Our research is globally significant on issues as diverse as using robots to save the Great Barrier Reef from crown-of-thorns starfish,
using drone-based systems to protect wildlife during natural disasters,
biofabrication to rebuild bodies ravaged by disease,
and developing air quality protocols to protect the world from viruses such as COVID-19.
Empowering Indigenous Australians is a priority, especially through our Karumba Institute for Indigenous Research and the Ujuru Unit, which supports our students.
and our pioneering advocacy for inclusion gives thousands every year access to university.
Our commitment to sustainability and the environment is demonstrated in programs converting solar energy to hydrogen fuels.
And by nurturing young entrepreneurs, our graduates are set to have a transformative influence on the economic and social fabric of Australia.
Being the first Australian business school to gain Triple Crown accreditation is just one of the many ways we continue to lead and outperform our peers.
Being part of a university so confident of its place in the world,
which delivers lifelong learning opportunities for students
and real benefits for staff, partners, and the community,
is truly inspiring.
So join us at QUT,
the university for the real world.
So QUT is very proud to be known as the university for the real world, as you see on the video. So, but what does the real world actually mean? It's about actually giving you the practical skills to support the theory that you'll be learning. This means that when you graduate, you can step into your career with confidence because you have had hands-on experiences during your courses. So we are a young university with global outlook. We strive to connect our students with the real world through practical, hands-on learning that prepares our graduates for the careers of tomorrow and the future. As you can see here, this is actually our 5 key pillars of QUT. So real world courses, industry connections, graduate for the future, innovation and entrepreneurship, and also sustainability. So next, I just want to mention a bit about some courses that we have that related to our topics today. So on the undergraduate level, first we have Bachelor of IT, which have 2 main majors in the computer science and information system. And actually Jason did his bachelor degree in this part. So he did information system, and so he can tell you more about this program. So as you can see here, there are some, I also mentioned the second majors and some minors that also available in this degree. And we also have Bachelor of Data Science and also Games and Interactive Environments. For the postgraduate level, we have Master of Robotics and Artificial Intelligence. And I just want to mention that we are #1 in research institution for robotics in Australia. This is based on the Australian Research Magazine 2021. And we also have Master of Data Analytics, which there will be 3 majors that you can choose from. And we also have Master of IT, and there are about 8 majors that you can choose from, and Master of Business Process Management. Although the next one, although this is not actually under IT faculty, but it's still very closely related. So we have some program in creative industry, which actually also have some relation with IT. For example, Bachelor of Design, majoring in interaction design. So I just also want to mention that we are #1 in Australia for our media and communication programs, and we are number 15 in the world. And this is has been going on for 6 consecutive years that we are #1 in Australia on this field.
I'm Jen Sieving, an interaction designer, artist, and a lecturer. I'm also the study area coordinator for interaction design. Studying interaction design is about imagining the future of interactions with technologies, because the area is growing and changing as technology and society changes rapidly. Interaction design is the design of interfaces between people and computers. What we as people interact with, the thing that mediates our experience of technology. So apps, websites, and we teach this at QUT. We also teach more than this, because actually interaction design is broader than this. It's about people, how they live, how they work, how they play, how they access information, how they interact. The environments people are in also influence the design. So work, leisure, if they're in a city, in a hospital. For example, a patient will experience a hospital and the technology differently to how the surgeon does. The environment and the people influence the interaction design. Of course, there's also the technology. Are you designing for the Internet of Things, for robots, for cars, for augmented reality, for wearable technology? The technology keeps changing and there are lots of job opportunities. Interaction design is a growing area. Interaction designers work at digital design agencies and increasingly at in-house teams, from ThoughtWorks, Deloitte, to government, to Google. The most common names for what we do are interaction designer, user experience designer, web designer. So search for them in the job search engines. You'll also find that you end up doing lots of other things as an interaction designer, from interface design to user research. Studying interaction design at QUT is
So I will not play the rest of the video because it's will be too technical. So wait, just
hands-on.
Okay, so next one we also have Master of Digital Communications. So that's conclude my presentation actually about QUT, and I'm gonna hand over the time to Jason. Just let me stop sharing. Okay, Jason, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Justina. So please just give me a moment while I prepare my presentation. And away we go. Is that visible for everybody? All right, thank you very much. All righty. So hello, everybody. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Jason Rumengan. I am originally from Jogja, Indonesia, and I moved into Brisbane about a little over 3 years ago. And as previously mentioned, I currently work as a cybersecurity consultant at PwC Australia. So I also did a Bachelor of IT, majoring in Information Systems at QUT, graduated this July, actually. And a little bit about that, actually, information systems, I like to think of as what computers can do for us. It's understanding businesses and their problems and how technology can bridge the gap between where they are right now and their problems and where they want to be in the future. So it's understanding, hey, what sort of technology do we need and what does it need to be able to do? And then being able to communicate that with business. So I'm here, first of all, to start off with what's out there in terms of careers in Brisbane specifically, before we move on to handling Pythons, pretty much coding. So let's start. I've just compiled a small short list of IT jobs, but I invite you to also look at these as well. So for example, things like interaction design can also be searched the same way I will do this here, or I have done this here. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about, for example, being an information security analyst. So that's just one of many jobs in IT, because IT, as previously mentioned, is very diverse. It's not just simply coding anymore. So first of all, about information security analysts, what we do is we design, implement, and review security measures, the things that keep ourselves, our devices, our computers, and our data safe. And this can range from as simple as policy saying, okay, don't click on suspicious links, or don't answer phone calls that you don't know, or don't tell people your name and date of birth just because they said, oh, you've got a fine that you need to pay. It's things like that, or even implementing firewalls, routers, or even drawing up architectures to say, okay, this is where computers need to be, and this is where servers need to be to make them absolutely secure. The reason why this has become very popular, and we'll see how popular it really is because that companies collect a lot of data, because it's very important to the way they run their business. But at the same time, they are also facing increasing pressures from regulators to keep that data safe. And we as customers also have the right to know that our data is in the right hands. And we only need to look at some major incidents in Indonesia and even in Australia to know that when companies don't get this right and they get hacked and our data gets released, the consequences can be very severe. So I've done a bit of research on SEEK. So as you can see down there, SEEK, which is a very large job search engine in Australia. And so in Queensland, the state where Brisbane is based, we have found that information security analysts are actually growing in terms of demand. So over the next 5 years, we expect there to be 38.9% more of us than there are today. And right now, so pretty much as of yesterday, there are 33 jobs ready for you out there if you have the skills to become an information security analyst. So as part of that as well, I've also found that the typical salary for people in information security is pretty good. It's already 6 figures. It's 100,000 on average. So typically, if you enter this job, you'll get to this level. And this, for the most part, analysts are quite entry to mid-level. So you don't really have to have had years and years and years of experience, and this could be yours. Now, I'll probably have to talk about the most stereotypical job as well, the software developer. So software developers design and build the applications that we use today, including Zoom. the very place where this webinar is taking place, that's a software developer who's built it as well. And so you can probably understand the importance of software developers in our time at the moment, because everything runs on technology, and for things to run on technology, people have to develop the applications that let them do the things that they want to do. Now, because software developers have been around for quite some time and it's quite popular from the beginning, you can tell that there are a lot more jobs. But on the flip side, the growth isn't as high because it's already, if you think about it as a graph, it's already up there, right? So from here, the growth doesn't really get that much higher than, for example, information security, where companies are now waking up to the fact that, it's really, really important. So you have 696 advertised jobs right now in Brisbane, or at least Queensland. So that also includes other areas around the state. And we also see that the typical salary is still around that 6-figure mark. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Now, this is the last, but certainly not least job, and it's certainly not the only job in IT. And it's also one that's very popular these days as well, and it also surrounds data. So the data scientists. So data scientists drive insights from big data in the sense that, okay, we can probably circle back to what big data is, because it's a bit of a buzzword, I admit. People say, oh, big data is the big trend, this really big thing that we have to understand, but a lot of people don't understand big data itself. Like, what is it? So big data is essentially that concept of data that is so diverse in its typing, in its volume as well. It's so large that we can't just look at it. It's not as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that you can read. We are talking millions or billions of lines of text, of imagery, of video, of anything. And this is really important because we produce 2 exabytes of data a day. So 2 exabytes is millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of bytes. And you thought a gigabyte was big. And so data scientists are there to be able to work with computers to process this information and then turn them into insights that we understand. So they might visualize it into something like you see on this laptop, like a dashboard. And so it's really easy for us to understand, because we can look at a graph and go, oh, okay, so profits are going up based on all the transactions we've had, and large companies can have millions of transactions. Whereas if you just gave them a list of transactions for, say, a company as large as Amazon, nobody's going to be able to read that, and nobody's going to be able to understand what it means and make decisions to drive their business. Now, because of that as well, it's also relatively good with respect to jobs as well. So there's 67 jobs right now. I think the caveat to the job growth part of that is because of the way that industry is working at the moment, where data is abundant, but again, companies are only starting to realize it, and it's also one where mostly it's large companies that operate in it. But that's also a bit of an advantage, isn't it? So it means that when you get into this job, you're pretty likely to end up at a large company, and it shows in the wages as well. So it's actually got a higher salary. So it's 115,000 typically if you end up as a data scientist. So it's higher because, again, data is important, and the companies right now, at least, who can actually get that much data to the data scientists tend to be really large. So that's really all I've got to cover with respect to the careers. So I might quickly move towards that, because this is okay. So that is the link actually to our next activity. So I might give everybody a minute or two to put that down on your laptop or your phone. Although, to be fairly honest, I think I would recommend that you use your phone, your laptop for this if you've got access to it. If not, it's okay. You can look at this, look at the webinar, or just look at the recording later on and follow along when you've got time. But I think in the meantime, I might want to open up for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Maybe we've got a Q&A. You're more than welcome to pop in a question if you'd like. Oh yes, and Kak is also put in that link in the chat. Thank you very much. Dan juga nanti kalau pertanyaannya ada yang mau dalam bahasa Indonesia juga nggak apa-apa. I can still speak Indonesian despite having been here for about 3 years. Okay, all right. So I think we've got that covered. So what I might do is I might open up this solution tab. So bear with me, that doesn't really mean it's the solution for the entire thing. It's just saying that by the end of this webinar, this will also be made available to you. So they're the solutions for this particular webinar if you'd like to take a look at it when you're free. And I'll make this available. What you've received will only say AECC Global and then Python's Coding 101. It's blank because of one more thing. So when I learned Python back at QUT, I was encouraged to try everything out myself. So I wasn't told to, hey, go and copy paste everything that the lecturer did. I was asked to type it in myself. And the reason why this is important is because it sort of gives you that muscle memory. Kind of like riding a bike, you can't just sort of look at somebody do it, you have to do it yourself. And so I really encourage you, if you do have a laptop handy, to open up the link that was shared and use that. And in fact, to make it a bit easier, if you do have access to a Google account, you can click File, save a copy. That will create a copy for you. And then what that does is you'll have a copy that you can save. At the moment, if you do anything on your file, once this webinar is over, or if you refresh your page, it's probably not going to save, which is probably okay as well, depending. So yeah, that's something you can consider. Okay, all right. So that's something you can do. Now, I'm presuming everybody's already got access to this page and can see it. Yeah. Okay, hang on a minute. I'm getting somebody saying in the Q&A that the link can't be opened. Is there potentially an error message that that is showing, or something along the lines of that? Alternatively, let's see what's happening. So we've got that. So that should work. Let's just give that a try myself. Loading. That should be working. That should be working.
I actually can't access the link as well, though, Jason.
Okay. I'll give this a quick try.
Yeah.
I'll send this. So that may have just been the, what should I call it? Sorry. There's that link shortening thing that we've used just to make it a little bit easier to open up the file. But if that's not working as it should, I have just sent over the full form. So if that works, then great, we can move on.
This one works actually.
Okay,
but
good.
I think the bit.ly bit broken, but yeah.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it's just yeah, I think bit.ly and all these link shortening things, they sometimes don't work as expected at times.
Yes,
so
the last link, guys, it works.
Yes. Yep. So hopefully with that last link, that's already working as expected. I do have a question about Python for machine learning, which I can touch on a little bit later. Now, first of all, let's start with this workshop as it is. So we are going to learn about Python, but not the snakes, because I don't know too much about zoology and snakes, but I do know about Python, the programming language. So starting from the beginning, a programming language is something that we can use to instruct computers to do something for us. And so using a programming language, we can develop many computer programs and scripts So we can actually create websites, and I remember doing this as part of an assignment at QUT actually. We can also use Python to create games because there is a library. So a library is something that you can install and add to Python to give it more functionality, to allow it to do more things. So there's this library called Pygame designed to make games. And you can also use it for data analytics scripts with new libraries like matplotlib, pandas, and the like. And this actually touches on machine learning a fair bit because Python has a very good ecosystem or environment full of libraries that are connected to machine learning. So you can download the libraries and tell the computer, okay, I want you to look at this data and then train this machine learning model, and then tell me what that model is, and tell me the answer that the model would give given another piece of data, something like that. So where are we? I think you've opened up the link and you're thinking, okay, this is new. I've never seen this before, perhaps, or if you've got experience, maybe have seen it. We'll be working today in Google Collaboratory, or Collab for short. So Collab lets us write and run Python code from our web browsers. So you don't need any other software. All you really need is just a good internet connection and your web browser. So there are actually other places to code in Python. They're otherwise known as integrated development environments, or IDEs. And for example, I think a very popular one is these days Visual Studio Code. But we won't be covering those today simply because it takes a lot of time to set up. I'd have to tell you, oh, go install this and that. And if you're running on Windows and if you're running on a Mac, the instructions might differ. And I think this is a more seamless way of experimenting with Python. So now that we know a little bit about Python, let's write our first program. So this is actually almost everybody's first program. And we usually joke, this is probably the first program that will always work. You can type anything you want. I like Hello World because this is also what we love to write. But I mean, like I could even write Hello Indonesia or AECC Global, and I could click play, and we can see what Python's going to do. First of all, though, we have to get Google to give us a computer. Essentially, we have to borrow a computer from Google, and then Google will run this code, and it will tell us what that code says. So I'll just give that a moment. Initializing. All right. So that was kind of cool. So we got Python to do something for us. We got a computer to do something, which is show hello world on the screen. So now let's unpack this a little bit to see what we've worked with. So let's just I'll just quickly copy and paste this just for the sake of seeing what we've got. So that print word at the beginning of the line with the parentheses like that and that is something that we call a function. It's kind of like an English verb in the sense that it tells Python, do something. We'll touch on functions a little bit more later because there are functions that Python comes with built in, and then we can actually even write our own functions. But let's talk about that a bit later. Now, what's the thing that we put inside here, these parentheses? And why is it that when I do this, right? If I do that and click play, that's going to run okay, right? But then there's something weird that's going to happen if I just did that. If I start forgetting these quotes, and you can already see Collab's already getting angry at me. It's kind of like when you use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you start seeing squiggly lines, you're thinking, okay, something's wrong. And if I start running it, I get red text and I get something calling error, invalid syntax. So there's something wrong happening, right? So we can see we can't use words without quotes. And it's because programming languages like Python, they have this concept of things being of a certain type. Data has to have a type. Now, if we don't put the quotes, Python doesn't really know what data type this is. It doesn't understand it at all. Now, just like most other programming languages, Python can work with a variety of data types. But the thing is that it can figure out what data type something is automatically. So in computer science speak, we call this dynamic typing, in the sense that if I put quotes here, it knows that it is text, or what we call a string. We'll touch on this a little bit later, and we'll see that Python understands a lot more than that. Whereas in other programming languages, so for those of you who are familiar with things like C, C++, C#, Java, they tend to be what's called statically typed. I need to tell the programming language, this is a string, this is a number. It's those, something like that. Python, we don't really have to do that. So we've seen strings. Python data types also include numbers that are called integers. So bilangan bulat, numbers with no decimal points. So 1, 2, 3, that's okay. Negative, that's fine. Or floating point numbers, so numbers that have decimal points, so 6 and 9. All right, something like that. Python can also deal with lists or a collection of many things. In other languages, we may also have the concept of what's called arrays. They're pretty much the same thing. So we do that. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The difference between Python and some of the other programming languages is that the list can contain anything. So I can mix and match. I can do that. I can even put a list inside of it again. I go 7, 8, 9, 9. I can put another list in there. I can practically do anything. And Python's perfectly okay with it. There are lots more data types that Python supports, but we won't go through all of them just in the interest of time. And any of these things that I've just mentioned can be used by functions if we put them inside these parentheses. And anything we put into parentheses after function is called a parameter. That tells Python to use whatever we put in there when it runs the function. So it'll look a bit like this. So print, there we go. So print hello world. I can tell to do print 1, 2, 3. I wanted to. Or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can do that. Now, here's a little bit of a trick. And this is something that if you become a software developer, you're probably really going to need. Imagine this. Imagine this. You're working on a normal assessment, an assignment that you're doing at like 2 a.m. Okay, maybe not the best idea. Please don't do that at 2 a.m. Please get some sleep. You do all your stuff and then you sleep. You come back again. You look at it and you're like, what did I do? I've completely forgotten what I've done. I've lost my train of thought. And that usually happens when you don't write notes about what you're going to do next, right? Or what you've done in the past. Now, okay, that tends to happen sometimes. Now, this is the same thing that happens with coding and with a lot of software projects. I guess with simple things like we're doing right now, it's pretty easy to keep track of what's happening. But once you start dealing with thousands of lines of code, and I've done this before in an internship, it's really difficult to understand what you're doing if you don't have notes. Thankfully, Python and a lot of programming languages gets the idea of comments. You can put comments with code, so like this, like, you know. Python won't read anything that you write with a hash at the front. It will run everything else. So it will do hello world, but it won't do anything with this because this is meant for the humans. This is meant for you coming back to the code 6 months later and then understanding, oh, wait, I wrote that. And maybe I wrote this because I wrote this code because XYZ. So it's very, very helpful. And it's also best practice to do this. And in fact, I remember when I was at QUT, we were actually assessed on whether our code had comments because they wanted us to understand that this is best practice when you're starting to work on large projects. So that's the first bit of it. I'm happy to take a question or two, perhaps, about the content that we just covered, or some of the, or just any question really. So I'll just take a look. Okay. I'll probably take a question from Fariza. How is Python used for machine learning? So Python is used for machine learning in the sense that you would first of all download the libraries that you would use for machine learning. You would then use Python to, first of all, you can use it to manipulate the data. Let's say you've got a 1 gigabyte spreadsheet of customer transactions, right? But then they're all in a very weird format. Like, for example, the numbers are wrong. Some of them don't have dates when all of them should, or the prices. Some of them don't have prices. They're a bit wrong, right? So you can use Python to get rid of the lines in the spreadsheet that should not, that, you know, you can get rid of the lines that don't have prices, first of all. You can then use Python to create what's called a machine learning model. So a model is a representation of what's expected out of your data. So for example, from this transaction, we can create a model that says, okay, well, I expect transactions to look like this, for example. For example, maybe your data is fraudulent transactions, whether or not a transaction is legitimate, or if it's fraudulent in the sense that somebody stole your card and just went away shopping, right? So you could train a model to say, okay, if, for example, and the model will decide this on its own. For example, if it's done at a certain period of time and it costs this much, it's probably fraudulent, right? So you can tell Python, go and look at this data and tell me what you think. And then afterwards, you can then take some more data of transactions, but you don't know if they're legitimate or fraudulent. Give it to Python based on that class model, and then it will tell you, okay, that one's legit, that one's fine, that one's fine, not this one. You'll have to be careful with this one, this looks fraudulent. So that's how Python can be used for machine learning. It is pretty much the programming language that you would use to actually do everything related to machine learning. Hopefully that answers your question. All right. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. I'll be answering maybe 1 or 2 questions as we go along. Yep. Okay. All right.
Do you want to choose the questions you want to answer, Jason, or do you want me to read?
I've already answered one. Thank you. I can do that. I can do this. It's all good.
That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's move on with working with things. So we've seen functions, which are like our verbs, but Python also has operators, which lets us do mostly mathematical things, right? So we can add, multiply, and subtract. I'm going to use print here just so that we can see everything. So 2 minus 1, print 3 multiplied by 2, print 4 minus 3. So these all work. These all work just fine, right? And we can also do exponentiation, 2 to the power of 8, 256. Now, here's an interesting thing. We can add numbers. We can also add strings. So we can do something like print 3, and I'll type today, hello plus world. And this is what's called concatenation. And here's another funny little trick. And I believe this is actually used in a lot of other programming languages as a challenge question. But honestly, if you're using Python, you're practically cheating. In a lot of programming languages, you'll get a question in an exam probably saying, hey, write star or an asterisk like 5 times. Mostly in other programming languages, you would have to resort to iteration or loops, which we'll touch on a bit later. In Python, you can pretty much just do that. So you can actually multiply strings and it'll just show up like that. Actually pretty handy. Okay, so now next up, how can we remember things? All of this is great. We can start doing things. We know that Python understands objects and data, but what if we wanted to perform a lot of operations on a lot of numbers? Now, maybe for the sake of just quickness, I am going to copy and paste some stuff. This is just for the sake of brevity. This 12 plus 14, 12 plus 14 plus 6, 12 plus 14 plus 16 divided by 3 doesn't look very great. And even I got confused just trying to say it out loud because I don't understand what these numbers are. And perhaps you as a programmer coming back to this code in 6 months won't remember it either. But Python lets you store things in what are called variables, a lot like mathematical variables like X and Y, so that you can remember what they are. You can remember things, you can assign names and use them with operators and functions. So you can turn that code above this at 12, 14, and the like to this. Number of apples, 12. Number of grapes, 14. Number of booleans, God, I miss boolean. Number of 3, right? And then we can turn that, this piece of code here. I could just instead use this. Number of apples, number of grapes, number of booleans, and finally number of goods. Right? So that's already starting to look a little bit better. You can sort of understand that we're dealing with fruits, we're dealing with numbers of fruits, so it's probably the average of it, right? For better practice, I'd even just say, okay, print the average number of fruits. So this is making it very crystal clear to me what I did, and so if I came back to it, I'd understand what's happened, right? And the great thing about variables is we can easily change the value of a variable that we've already set without changing the code that uses them. So for example, if we had this, I just did that again, right? I could really easily go, okay, maybe I don't want 12 apples. Maybe I want just, I don't know, 6. Maybe my friend ate 6 of my apples and I need to go and tell him, hey, what did you do? Why did you steal my apples? Or something like that. So you can do that. And you can run this again, the exact same line of code, but then the result's different because it's now using 6 apples instead of 12 at the top there, right? So that's pretty handy. That's pretty handy, just because it makes it a lot easier for you to read your code and know what sort of data you've worked with. It also makes it a lot easier for you not to have to copy and paste the same line of code and change numbers in areas, like say, for example, just that one on the left, you change that to another number. This is making it a little bit easier. All right, so that's that part done with respect to the use of variables. I'll take some questions now. All right, hello, Ella. Research to genomic data, sequencing data. Okay. Genomic data for sequencing. Hello, Ella. Thanks for your question. It's a pretty good one. I'll have to admit it's quite an interesting question. I do understand that Python is used for research, but unfortunately, I haven't really used Python for research. And in a way, I think with respect to sequencing, if it's genomic sequencing, that's a very specific part of Python. I'm aware that it is possible, but I would encourage that this be researched as well. But with respect to something like sequencing, as in you want to sort something, sorting is not particularly difficult, and I can show you how to sort. So I think given a list, I can't call it a list, my list of, I don't know, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3. There should be, if I'm not mistaken, you can use sort my list. Oh, okay, I realize now. It's a method. So a method is a function that is attached to a variable, or essentially an object, where you have to have that object already there. So you can go my list.sort. That's done, but I think what I might do to demonstrate what's happening, it's sorted, actually. No, not anymore. Sorted my list like that. So now it's in the right order. So that's not necessarily sequencing. Perhaps CCG1, AGG2. I think if it's a very specific sort of part of genomics, I'm unfortunately I haven't actually had to deal with genomics actually. So it's it's probably something that I would encourage you to speak with your supervisor to gain some more insights as to where you can find the resources, because I'm sure, given that Python is used by researchers and people worldwide, there's already a library to deal with genomics, and there are resources. For example, if I search for genomics, there's already a course to do that. There is a Python module to do it, and there are lots of resources that you can use to do your task. And I think this is the beauty of a lot of programming languages, is that you can pretty much find any way to do anything because somebody's probably already done it before. All right. So this is all well and dandy, but how do we decide to do things? Because if we just keep telling Python what to do all the time, then I guess there's not really much of a point in writing programs, because then we're still stuck manually deciding, do this, do that, do this, do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Python works. So an interesting Python data type is the Boolean data type. It can only be true or it can only be false. So this is a little bit like in mathematical logic when you've got your true false. When you've got true or false on either side. So you can use them in logical operators, which can tell you whether something is true or false as a Boolean, like is 12 greater than 10. You can compare things like that. Is 6 equal to 10? Probably not, unless maybe it's a different universe we're talking about. Is 90 not equal to 90? Well, no, 90 is 90. We can probably see that. But it's very helpful to use this with things like variables where you don't actually know what's in them until, for example, you use it once you program. You can combine them with and or as well. So for example, I'll just quickly do this. Is 1 greater than 2 and 8 less than 7? Well, 1 is not greater than 2. 8 is not less than 7, so that's false. We can also do something like that. And Python is very strict with this. So even if you just miss this by capital H, smaller h, this is still not going to say that equal. And that's why we're getting a false here, because this is wrong and that's also wrong. So back from mathematics in high school, we know that if false or false is still false. So another useful operator when we work with lists is in. So it checks whether something's in a list, and this is pretty helpful. So if you go type 1, 2, 3. It's true. So 1 is in this list, right? And you also have not. So 8 not in. I'll just take this list. So that's false because 8 is definitely in this list. Now, I will note that other languages use that. We've also seen that this exclamation mark was also used up the top here as well. So that's still found in Python, just not really here. Although I believe this is also possible, you can still do that. Well, okay, maybe not in Collab. Maybe not in Collab, it's reading it a little bit differently. All right. So using these sorts of things, we can tell Python to do something if a condition holds true. These are done using if statements, which look like that. If a condition within these brackets, within these parentheses is true, do whatever I put down here. So for example, coming back to that last example that we had with the apples and the durians, if the number of apples is less than the number of durians, then print, I have more apples. Now, this is a little bit wrong, obviously, and this is what we tend to call a logical error. Why would I say I have more apples when actually I've got less? I've got fewer. It should look like that, right? And that's not going to do anything, because what Python does is if the condition isn't true, it's not going to do anything, right? It will do nothing. But we can tell Python to do something else if the condition is false, if we give it the else keyword. So for example, I go and do something like that. Okay. is greater than print, I have more apples. Else, print, I have more durians. Or they're equal. So I have more durians or they're I have more durians or they're equal. Yeah, that sounds about right. We had only 6 apples after all. We can also tell Python to check whether a different condition is true if a previous condition is false using the elif keyword. So I'll take another example here. So elif is actually a shortened version of else if. I'm aware of some languages that still use else if. I remember Visual Basic doing that in the past. So for example, is raining, like beaches, like mountains. I'll quickly sort of just copy and paste for the sake of brevity and time so that we can focus on questions if you've got any. So for example, I'll say, if it's raining, I want to stay at home. But if it actually isn't raining and I like beaches, I'll say go to the beach. If not, go to mountains, because we probably don't really like beaches, might as well just go to the mountains. So I say go to the beach because it's not raining. We go down here, we like beaches, we'll do this, and that's it. It ends there. It doesn't keep going if one of these conditions is already true. And we can also use nested if. So you can sort of go, if this is done, let's evaluate something else. And so if that's true, then is something else true? It will look a bit like this, right? So let's say I'm changing it to is raining, it is raining. Now I don't want to. So we can this is sort of kind of like a rephrasing of the last one. But it pretty much does a very similar thing. So I'm saying, if it isn't raining, then I'll start thinking, do I like beaches? Do I like the mountains? But if it's raining, well, I just want to stay at home. And I want to stay at home. And I think part of what I've shown you here is also saying that in programming languages, there's not always one right way to do something. There's not just one right way to solve a problem. You can do it in multiple ways, and it's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes, though, in some companies, there will be best practices that you can adhere to that makes it easier for your coworkers to look at your code. Now, we've already seen, though, that Python uses indents. So if you press tab, that's sort of how that works to determine what code has to be run if a condition is true. But what if I forget it? What if I forget it? For example, if I did, oops, what if I did that, right? And so that's completely missing all of it, right? I click that. It's not going to like it. This is because Python, like most programming languages, have what's called syntax. So syntax is about the rules of how you write something. It's sort of like writing things in English using grammar. But I think the difference is with English grammar, even if your grammar is not perfect, we can usually still understand you. With Python, it's very, very strict. If you violated syntax rules, it's probably not going to do as you say. It's just going to give you some like an indentation error saying, well, I need you to do that. And that will actually start running. Right? All righty. Okay. So I'm going to cover off 2 more things. I think before that, I'll look at some of the questions. Not to be rude, but why are we using Collab instead of PyCharm, Visual Studio Code, and the like? So thanks for that question, Dafa. It is a good question. And this is really for the sake of practicality, because we understand that people joining the webinar may not necessarily have all the technical expertise to install IDEs, and nor would it also be quick or practical to sort of have people install an IDE like PyCharm or Visual Studio Code right on the get-go. Those things can take quite a while to install. So that's the reason why we've gone with Collab this time around. Well, is the code that we run in Collab the same? It is exactly the same. This is still Python. This is still Python. In fact, what Collaboratory does, what Collab does, is it uses something known as a Jupyter notebook. Jupyter notebooks are a specific form of Python file where I can start adding things like text, like this sort of text here. And Jupyter notebooks can still run in Visual Studio Code or PyCharm. You just need to install the right extensions. So really, the code is still the same. All right. For iron range n, is this code the same in both IDEs? That's actually pretty good. That's actually a pretty good question to have, because I will show you that and show everybody that pretty soon. So we can get onto that. So we're going to talk about loops and repeating things, which actually that syntax of for I in range n is a form of that repetition. So let's take a look at what that looks like. The benefit, first of all, of using computers is they can do things repeatedly, saving us from doing it. I mean, probably some of you may have had to do this, right? You've done something bad at school. You get called up by a teacher and they go, right, I promise I will not do this again, like 20 times. Now, with a computer, if you had a computer, you could probably cheat and just write a Python program to write, I will not do this ever again 20 times. Even if it was 1,000 times, you could have Python do it forever. So Python and all the programming languages lets us do this using loops. There are two loops. The while loop, which runs the code in the loop, so within the loop while the condition is true, which is why it's called a while loop. So while condition syntax looks like this. So for example, if I do x equals 10, while x is greater than 0, print x. Now, I actually believe that there are some experienced programmers in the room. So I'm not sure if I need to tell you what's going to happen if I run this, but we'll see what it does anyway. It's just going to keep running it forever. There is a massive pitfall with using loops within programming, and it's called an infinite loop, where the program just doesn't know when to stop because the condition is always true. So what we need to do, and I don't want to waste Google's time or processing power for that matter, what we need to do is add a piece of code in every loop that we make that will eventually make the condition false. So in this case, if we need to make sure that x is not greater than 0, we'll have to tell it, okay, let's just decrement it. We'll just subtract it by 1. So you can do x equals 1, but there's a shorter way of doing this, as is the case with a lot of programming languages, where you can just write this equals operator. That. So they mean the same thing. They mean the same thing, but it's just shorter to type. And now you've got a well, x is greater than such. Let's see what's happened here. Aha, it's actually operator and equals. And now you've got a countdown. You've got a for loop, so that was the one that Dafa actually talked about, which runs the code in the loop. First of all, you have a for each item in a list, so you can do for cd in. I'll quickly copy and paste that. Jakarta, Surabaya, Semarang, Jakarta. I'll add some of our Queensland cities because I live in Queensland. I love it. It's an amazing place. Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Cairns. Really beautiful holiday destinations. Print City. So I'll print all of them. Jakarta, Surabaya, all the way until the very end. And you've got, as Dafa said, for number in range 10. Print number. And this actually, I think we may have already noticed this, but Python is quite flexible with syntax in some cases. I could do that, I can do that, and that will still work. I can add the parentheses in an if statement or a while loop, or I can just not use them and they'll work just fine. Python is quite flexible in some aspects. It is pretty good, and it's actually one of the reasons why it's usually the first language people are taught in universities. Notice though that the range function will usually start from 0 all the way to the number I've written down there, -1. But we can change where that starts, where range starts, and how much it adds to subsequent numbers. So for example, I can do num dot. So this essentially says, okay, from 1 to 10, or 10 minus 1, rather. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. As expected. Sorry. Now, what if we wanted to just count in twos, right? So just 1, 3, 5, so on. You can do that. For number in range 1, 10, step. So the next part is step, which is saying, okay, I want you to add by this much, right? 2. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, as expected, right? We can also use it to count down, but to count down, we need to start with the biggest number first. So we have to start with 10. We end at 0, and we go -1. And print number. Right? 10, 9, yeah. All right. That's something you can do as well. And just like if statements, you can nest loops. And this is actually very interesting, because this is way too common a first year question, especially when you're learning programming for the first time. You usually get a question that does this: write code that prints a 5 by 5 square of asterisk, like that, but don't print it, because I've seen some people go, okay, you know what, I can answer this by doing that. And by the way, this \n means new line, or essentially space. So, yeah, I can do that, but at the same time, it's not really the intention of those sorts of questions. So what we can do instead is we can loop. We can say for each row in range 5, so there's 5 rows and there are 5 columns. I want to print. So for every column, I want to print that. But then, when I move to another row, I need to give it a space so that it goes down and I can print the next row. So I have to do that. A blank print is essentially a space in Python. Yeah, that isn't what I was looking for. Now, this is a little bit about coding. Sometimes things really do go wrong, and the easiest way to figure out how things work is to just go Python print function. Search it on Google, and you'll find documentation that tells you what's happening. Right? And so as part of that, we can feed it this thing called end. So there's a named parameter within Python called end, and that says, what do I print at the end? And the default is space. So that's why that's not working. Okay, now I've got it. So what I can do then is I just go there, I say end is assigned the value of nothing. So that means I'm not going to get that space every time I print that star. And I can do that, and it's working as expected. That really is the beauty of programming languages. You can find pretty much any solution you want anyway. You can also combine them with if statements, and I like to use the example of checking for a prime number. This probably may not be the most efficient, so pardon me, but if I want to check for a prime number, I just say, okay, look, from say, I just go, can that number be divided by anything that's not 1? So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, blah, 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 all the way up to that number -1. So I have to divide it one at a time. And then if I actually get it divided properly, and that's not prime. So, for example, I want to go 15 prime. I'll just start with true. So let's assume it's true first. And following our concept of commenting things properly. So I want to do this. So if number to check modulo number is equal to 0. So for those of you who don't know, the modulo operator here it means the remainder of a division. So if you remember, like back then when we used to sort of divide by doing that, you know, 6, 36, 6, 36, 0. Whatever that remainder down there is what's going to get returned from that modulo operator. So essentially, if I can divide the number that I want to check with any sort of other number and I get no remainder, probably not prime. So afterward, all I got to do is, for example, if I wanted to make this look pretty so that we can see what happened, I can do that. This is another thing with print. You can actually provide it with a lot of things to print, separated by a comma, and it will actually automatically give you a space. So I don't actually have to add that space. It's pretty interesting. Else, all right, that's working as expected. 15 is definitely not a prime number, and neither is, from memory, 51. Neither is, I don't know, 9999. Certainly not, things like that. But we do know for a fact that, say, 11 should be good. So that's working as expected, which is good. Now, before we move on to the last bit, which is about not repeating ourselves, I'll take a question or two. Let's see. Start out like mountain. Okay, let's take a quick look. All right. I can probably take a look at this. So Natasha has asked, which tools are used most when making insights from a database? Is Matplotlib enough, or should we use Seaborn too? Thank you. Okay, good question, Natasha. So from my experience, because I've actually taken machine learning at QUT, so Matplotlib is a pretty good tool already to derive insights because it already gives you that ability to draw your graphs and charts. It's pretty good. Seaborn, on the other hand, is a relatively newer library that has much of the same functionality from memory, but perhaps more of it. So I remember, for example, you can use Seaborn to very quickly draw heat maps. So heat maps where, you know, a certain number or a certain area becomes darker or lighter based on its value, things like that. Or it might also just be the fact that Seaborn has better syntax. It's easier to work with. So I guess this question isn't, it depends. If you are happy with Matplotlib and it does what you need it to do, you can just use Matplotlib. Otherwise, if you find that you're needing to do something and Matplotlib is failing to do that, then you can simply use Seaborn. So for example, something like that heat map, you can also search for things that you want to do. For example, if you say, I want a heat map, you know, Python heat map, probably the first thing that is going to pop up is Seaborn, because Seaborn definitely has a function to create a heat map. So in that case, then use Seaborn. Or, you know, if you just want to draw a chart, then you've got other libraries like Plotly. You can also just be very specific and ask for Matplotlib's way of doing it, and there's already a tutorial to do so. Things like that, really. So Felice has asked, are there any questions for the Python program or website? Felice, if you could get back to me on that one in the Q&A section, that would be much appreciated, because I'm not entirely, I'd like a bit more clarity with respect to the question. Thank you. While we're on loops, how to make a star that looks like a mountain. I know how to make it to use a loop. I didn't, and I don't understand. Thank you. All right. We can probably take a look at that together. Essentially, what's happening here is you want to be able to, we can tackle this very quickly. We can sort of say, okay, we'll start with counter. what we do that. So essentially we'll start with, we'll just have the 1. I'll say, okay, max rows 5. So we're saying we want to make 5, right? The counter is 1. So while counter is less than or equal to 5, then essentially print space times max rows minus counter. So essentially the concept being that you want to print as many spaces as there are that are not up to 5. So sort of like, okay, if I'm just gonna draw 1 star, I gotta go space, 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 space first, right? And then end is nothing. And then I want to print the star itself. And then afterwards I want to print nothing. So something like that, right? So this hopefully should work. Let's go. Okay, that is not liking me because for some reason it unsupported operand types for string and int. I think it's thinking that I want to do some this thing with order of operations where it tries to go, okay. It is trying to multiply with this, which is okay, but then it's going, okay, I've got space, 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 and then it tries to subtract it, which can't happen, which is why we need to provide parentheses to tell Python, do this first, then do that. So let's do that. And that is not working as I expected because I actually forgot to do that. No. I'll need to get back to you on this one. Funnily enough, because oh no, there's another one. No? And another one. I'll have to get back to you on this one. To be fairly honest, there are also a lot of tutorials that can do this. We can revisit this a little bit later as well. I'll quickly look at that later, okay? Okay, so just to wrap up on this one, how can we not repeat ourselves, right? Because many of the things we do in large programs will be repeated. If you go, 10,000 lines of code, there's a good chance some of them are just the same things over and over again. We can repeat things using loops if we do it consecutively. Like I do this once and then another time, another time, another time, and another time. What if we needed to do the same thing at another time? So let's say if we wanted to see if a number was a prime number, kind of like, I'll just have to quickly get rid of that. So we wanted to do that, but then I wanted to do this, and then I wanted to do that and do it for a different number. I mean, this technically works. I can do this. But the issue is that whenever we needed to change how our code to check for prime numbers here works, if we want to change it, for example, we found an efficient way of doing it, then I'd have to change it here. I have to change it there again. And our code is already very, very long because I've repeated myself more than once. And the biggest issue with changing things in a way like that over and over and over again is that at some point, we're probably going to miss an area where that code is being used, right? So that's pretty bad. And that's the reason why programmers are always told, don't repeat yourself. So one of the best ways to do this is to write our own function. So we do this by doing this. So def is defined. We just say def name. We add any parameters that we want. So things that we want our function to use. Like, do something. And I can optionally also say return something. I've only added the parentheses just to say that it's optional. Probably don't write it like that, but yeah, you can do this if you wanted to, right? Yeah, so as a result, what I can do is instead of using just what I did up there, which really doesn't look very pretty, you can instead then do this. Def check prime. Let's say number to check. I'll put this up here. Okay. And then I can say return is prime. I'm going to make it return. Right. Okay. And then from there, what I can do is I'll just say, okay, number to check. I'm thinking 9. If I will probably use, that's fine. I'll probably use the same one that we used in the past, which looks a lot like that, right? I could also write a function to do this for me, but I think in the interest of time, I'll show one function that I can write. And so that works. And then, you know, for example, I might say, looking forward to seeing you at QUT, for example, right? But then I want to run this thing again. I can. And that says false because 999 is not prime. So this is pretty useful when you've got a lot of things that you want to do in different parts of your code over and over again. So hopefully this has been pretty useful as a crash course to Python for all of you, because spoiler alert, this is about the first 3 to 4 weeks of QUT's introductory Python course. So I do understand that it may be a little bit confusing just given how much information has been handed out today, but thank you so much for participating. I'll open up for questions and answer whatever questions we've got at the moment. Hang on a minute. All right, let's see what we've got. Okay, so Muhammad Ali Aziz has asked how to read Python documentation effectively during learning this language. Can you tell me a little bit more on how to search for others to study, how to read it, and why does Python run slowly? All right, a multi-part question. How do you read Python documentation effectively? So first of all, it's mostly a matter of, let's say, okay, I'll quickly share my screen again so that I can sort of show you. Okay, which one is it trying to share? This is not what I was expecting to share, but it's okay. We can do that. The Python standard library will give you the documentation for Python. First of all, you probably want to be very clear what you're searching for, which is, for example, the specific function like print. Click on that. And then let's say you need to search for end or something like that. Well, you would really just be using a lot of that sort of, you would use searching to find what you want and read it sort of slowly and understand how it works, right? To search for source code from others to study, you can sort of just go, okay, Python, let's see, okay. Triangle asterisk. This is actually that one that we just talked about. So we can actually take a look, for example, and there are lots of resources where you can then take a look at that, decide the number of loops. You can read that. That actually gives you a pretty good instruction. And then they'll write that. So that is actually the code that you want. So it's pretty quick. It's just Python and then what you want to do. Why does Python run slowly? Now, this is actually probably going to get into a lot more detail than normal, but essentially it's because Python is what's called an interpreted language, where your computer reads the line you've made, turns it into bytecode, so sort of like a middle language that only the computer understands, and then runs that. That's in comparison to what's called a compiled language, where even before the code is run, the computer's already turned it into that middle ground code. In fact, it's actually assembly or machine code that the computer can run just like that. It's much faster. That's the reason. Ella's asked, if I put all data in Excel spreadsheet, can the data be transferred, or do I have to write it again? You can automatically transfer it. You can use pandas, for example, to automatically import the stuff. How up in Python work? Roughly, could I please get you to clarify what OPP is in this case? Is Python beginner friendly? To be frank, I hope you would think that it is very beginner friendly from simply attending the workshop, simply because Python is quite natural in the sense that it still reads a bit like English, and it's also quite forgiving with respect to syntax. It doesn't, you're not really forced to write in one particular way or the other. It's the reason why Python is very, it's usually the first language you will learn. I think the other part is actually the beauty of Python being an interpreted language is you don't have to go and compile it, wait a minute for it to finish compiling, run it, and then realize something has gone wrong. It's the reason why we usually think that it's beginner friendly. OOP, or object-oriented program. I just saw that. Thank you. So Python does support object-oriented programming, and it looks a little bit like, like that. So it's like this, class student, def init, def it looks a bit like that. And then I can sort of create a student thing. That should work. And then if I say print student, then I get a student object. A bit of a crash course on object-oriented programming. It's the concept that everything that you work with in a program is an object or a thing. Kind of like this pack of gum, kind of like this power bank is an object. There is a lot more that goes into it. And to be fairly honest, we could be here all week if I talked about it. But in a way, it is a concept of you can even write your own classes, or classes are kind of like cookie cutters from which we can create our objects. Right? Okay. Can I get the finished version of this lesson so I can learn by myself? I will share a link to what we have just done later. Will the solution be shared? It will. Can you show us an example of using Python for games? I will quickly take a look for Python game or Pygame. So this is actually an article about what Pygame is, the library that I talked about for doing games. There's even sample code to do everything that it's got. So it'll look almost like that. So this is something that is already there. It's pretty good, and I encourage you to look it up as well. Is just learning Python enough? Very good question, and sadly one of those it depends questions. If your work is centered around a lot of general purpose programming, or you just want to know how to write quick automation scripts, or you're in data science and your research team doesn't really use anything else, yes, Python is more than enough for most of that. However, in some cases like systems programming, when you're using things like Raspberry Pis, you probably need to learn another language like C. If you're writing very quick web applications, perhaps JavaScript is a good idea as well. It really will depend on what sort of software development you choose to undertake. So what is return for? You've used the code for return is prime. Thanks, Safa. So that refers to this, I presume. This essentially is kind of like returning it's kind of like a mathematical function, right? So fx equals y, right? So given something's being done here, it has to result in that. Return is Python's way of saying, hey, after this is run, I want you to give me something that I can put into a variable like that. And then I can use that to do anything else. So that's really the reason why we have return. Augustine has asked, how do I code in Python to find all the possibilities of the equation if there's a given rule such as that plus that equals that the that should be filled with numbers. So if you're talking digits and the like, it's also very much possible. I think off the top of my head, I'd say to use a lot of for loops to say, okay, digit number 1 is this, digit number 2 is that, digit number 3 is that, and just for each of the digits you can get, do this. If this is correct, print out the result. it would look a little bit like that. Unfortunately, we are running we're already on time, so I'm not too sure if I can do a bit of a live demo. And as the saying goes, in a lot of tech startup companies, live demos usually end in a fair bit of disaster. But thank you so much for the questions. They're very good, and it's good that you're engaging with this as well. Hopefully, you have learned a fair bit. If you would like the solution is, I believe, if I do this and that, stop sharing that. This should be the solution. All right, so I've just quickly shared that. Simply to Tony, if you could please help and provide the link to the attendees. All right, so those are the solutions. They remain accessible for all. This is pretty much what we've covered today. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you so much, Jason, for such an interesting and interactive session today. Thank you also for all the participants who actually throw questions, and we really hope that this session is really fruitful and beneficial for you, especially if you're really keen on studying IT in QUT. So yeah, I think to wrap up today, is there anything that you want to say, Justina, before we end the session?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being very active on the workshop. And yeah, I guess you can always come to talk to Ionela and one of AECC counselors if you want to ask more about studying in Australia. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you can check on your chat box, we actually put on an appointment link. So if you really want to, know more about QUT or studying in Australia in general, you can actually book an appointment with one of our experts. So we will be really happy to help you, assist you, and answer all your questions if you need any assistance on that. Perhaps a bit of information that if you want to meet our counselors face-to-face and consult about your study in Australia or in QUT, especially in QUT. We will have an enrollment day on the 17th of December. So it's Saturday in our office in Global Plaza, Indonesia, level 5. So you can just come and talk to us, discuss about your study plan in QUT. So we will be able to actually assist you and, consult your study plan face-to-face. So yeah, so Global Plaza Indonesia, 17 December at 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. So you can come anytime. All right, so I think we just wrap up today. Thank you so much again, Justina and Jason, especially for your time and your generosity to actually share everything. I believe it really beneficial, and yeah, hope to have another session with you again, perhaps in the future. Yeah, thank you, QUT, for collaborating with us today. So yeah, I would just say stay safe and healthy, everyone. We look forward to see you in our other session, in other interesting workshop. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.